afternoon, Milton Keynes. This is Mrinal Kulkarni. I sincerely hope that the power of this tender love story will spur questions. Did we really have to suffer so much? And in the name of what? My best wishes to Manjari, Abhay, and their daughters Tanvi and Mahi for the event today and the launch of In the Name of.
But now we will move on to the very important person in the room, who's someone who we're incredibly proud of, as you will know by all the books that are on sale out there, not just this one today. But importantly, I'd really love to introduce Manjari, who's going to take us through and start talking to us about In the Name of.
Can you hear me at the back? First thing, thank you so much for being here. We had over 300 confirmations and we've had a lot of dropouts in the last 2 days. So especially on such a warm day, thank you so much for making it. We really feel very special that you're here. Thank you. I'm just going to talk very, very briefly right now, take you through some images, and then Mahi and Tanvi are going to read excerpts from the book. And after that, it's really going to be an open floor, and we're hoping that you will ask a lot of questions, which I hope to be able to answer. We don't have to agree on everything we say, but it'll be great to hear more from you. So this one's going to be very, very short. This is my mother. It is my first book without my mother. It's a very big thing for us because this is her picture, a spontaneous picture at one of my book launches in the past called Bosses of the Wild. Some of the people here were there for Bosses of the Wild. This is Bosses of the Wild Pune, and she was not scheduled to be speaking at all, but she was so excited at the end of it. She said, can I just have the mic? And she said 2 sentences. So we've deleted the mic and this is her picture. The reason this is very, very important is that you will have a lot of questions for me about the book. And everything we do, we are, especially this book, comes from how we were brought up. And a lot of my, I would say my interaction with the world, interaction with my own culture from India is thanks to her. She was a medical doctor, but she was also a Bharatanatyam dancer. And, working in a very convent-educated, I would say, life, like Ira and Omar in the book. That's what happened to my brother and me as well, that we somehow lost connection with our own culture, but she brought us back. And every time we got to know more about it, it's thanks to her and taking us back to where we came from. So on that note, I'm just going to show you a few images, and I hope everyone's ready because they have no captions. And I'm very sure that somebody in the audience will recognize each image and tell us what it was. So this is In the Name of Why? Yes? Yes, so. Yes, this is very recently, it was in the news last week, right? This week, early this week. Commemoration of, yes, thanks. Pahalgam, yes, Ranjit, yes, Pahalgam. Very recently, for those in the audience who haven't recognized this young lady was married a week before this, and she was a tourist in Kashmir, and she, along with several other women, were left like this, losing their husbands, their loved ones, the male members of their family, being killed in a terrorist attack. And that's what led to the Indo-Pakistan, what has been termed as conflict. I don't want to go in that direction right now, but this was what happened. And this is at her husband's grave. They'd just taken a video a few minutes before it happened. So these are the painful images we see in the news today. Yes. Grenfell Towers, yes. I think everyone would know this one. Yes, next. Manchester Arena attack, yes, very much. Manchester Arena, which features in the book quite a bit in 2017, yes. The reason we have these images connected to the previous one is that it's not that it got over in 2017. It's still in the news, and very, very often it's in the news for various reasons. And the trial going on, all of it is very, very tightly connected to what's happening in the book. Because what we're trying to say is that what happened that time didn't end. It's still in our lives, and every morning we watch the news and something connected to it is still happening. 26/11 Mumbai attack, 2008. Very, very difficult, very painful for those of you who don't know. These were the men, 10 men who were sent across from Pakistan, came by boat, came into Indian shores, came to Mumbai and invaded schools, not schools, invaded the busiest station, which was earlier called the Victoria Terminus, the Shivaji Terminus, and the five-star hotels, and Chabad House, which was the Jewish center of worship, and they randomly killed 160 plus people. So this was 2008, very much again featuring in the book. Yes, this was among the 10 people, he was the only one caught alive, and then executed. Again, very tightly connected to the book, very much our own lives. I just keep remembering this because when he went to school in Mumbai that time was just a stone's throw away from where it all happened. He was in prison, very close to where we used to live. Very painful, and it's very much in the book, connected. Yes, next. Baby Moshe, who said that? Thank you. Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you, Baby Moshe. He was this little boy here. He was caught in that attack. He was found by the corpses of his parents. And this lady, her name is Sandra Samuels. She was his nanny in India. He was a Jewish child. His father was a rabbi there, and he was just found there. He was 2 years old when his parents died in that attack. But it's such a beautiful story because Sandra was taken to Israel by his parents, by his grandparents. They lived there, and what you see at the bottom is the 10-year anniversary in 2018, where Mumbai had a multi-faith welcome for Baby Moshe. And he came back, and Sandra came back, and his grandparents came with him. And again, that finds mention in the book, that let's let Mumbai heal, let the Mumbai we had heal again. Next. Yes, Babri Masjid. This was originally where the temple, the Hindu temple, where the birthplace of our Lord Ram was supposed to be, on top of which was the mosque built by the Mughal king Babur, which was the attempt to demolish in 1992. Again, very, very strongly mentioned in the book, because till 1992, Mumbai was a very different place, till the 6th of December. So that's a turning point, a different moment, because this ultimately led to riots in Mumbai in March of 1993, where Mumbai changed and stopped being secular one more time. Yes? Those who grew up in India would know this. Yes. Yes. Bhushan, yes. Preamble. This is the preamble of the Indian Constitution. And it finds mention in the book a number of times. Because as children, whichever school you went to, you were meant to learn it by heart. And we knew it by heart. We, the people of India. Next. Nathuram Godse. Yes, I think a lot of people here know. He was on the left, the person you see on the left. He was the person who assassinated Mahatma Gandhi in 1948. Yes? Mr. Radcliffe. Yes, that's right, Sanjay. Mr. Radcliffe. So the reason, again, it's very tightly connected to the book, because there are a lot of theories and a lot of understandings, misunderstanding, myths about Godse, Nathuram Godse, who assassinated Gandhi and why he did it. So the book really talks in depth about what really happened and why he really did it. But among the 21 reasons we see in what is available about him, the main reason is that he wanted the country, the subcontinent, to look like this, what you see on top. That is what is called Akhand Bharat, the whole of India. He felt he was, I won't go too deep into the book, but ultimately what he wanted to say, and the people who ultimately led to Gandhi's assassination were saying, is that we are one country. This is all one. Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, it's one country. It cannot be divided, it should not be divided, and Gandhi should have been able to stop it. And that was the core reason. But here we have Mr. Radcliffe, incidentally from Oxford, who was asked to draw the line between the countries, and he had never traveled abroad, he had never been outside the UK. He was asked to draw the line which divided these countries, and you see what you see. Today, which we are going back to the book and saying is the root cause of most conflict, which still exists, because if there was no partition, not just wouldn't have people have died that time, but even what's been happening over the past 70 years may or may not have happened like that. Yes? Windrush. Yes, Windrush. Again, very strong references to this in the book, because there's one part of the book which happens in Bradford, and that part of the family with, wonderful person, Maria, she comes on this boat. She comes here to this country. Yes, next. Auschwitz. Yes, the book ends in 2019 in Auschwitz, pre-COVID. There's no COVID in the book, so it ends in, this is where it ends. This is where, yeah. I was talking to our daughters the other day, and we said, why is this important? Does anyone recognize this? Yes? Very nice, very nice. Yes. Okay, so this is a Schindler's List. And what I was telling them is that when we grew up in India, we of course did not have internet in the 1980s and 90s. And what was our window to the world? Some films, some books, really, newspapers. And children are not so interested in newspapers, as we know, but some films and books. And this was a film which actually introduced us to what really happened, Schindler's List. So it is very much again a part of the book, and it remains a memory of this red coat. Yes? So this is really the reason for the book. We're going a little bit into the book and I'm going to stop. So the book starts with Omar and Ira, two people in the 1980s. They were born in 1974. They grew up in the happy Mumbai of those times. The last thing on their mind was partition or conflict or politics or religion. They actually didn't care. All that was in their mind was fun stuff. This was their school play, their nativity plays, because they went to a Protestant school. Yes, next. This is how they went anywhere. Right? There's a concept of the ladies' first class and the first class, a bit more about it in the book. This is how you go anywhere in Mumbai, and you're pretty happy going. Nobody seems to have any problem going even for a movie like that. Next. Yes, this was life really. A lot of people smiling and laughing because this was it. If you had this, you were fine, you were happy.
Absolutely.
Right? Because it's one of these overtly fizzy cold drinks, certainly not healthy. Nobody would serve them today, but they're there. And it's a darkened movie theater, and there's this popcorn which for some reason has a lot of turmeric in it.
Yeah.
And this is it. So the book begins in chapter 1. It begins with, for those, how many from Mumbai here? Oh wow. See, this is Plaza Cinema, Dadar, Mumbai. Right? This is where they're having this, and life is fine. You don't need anything else in life. Next. Yes, so it's a famous movie with Mahi and Tanvi. We are going to read a little more about this. This movie is called Amar Akbar Anthony. And that's how the movies were quite ridiculous. But as you can see, you don't need to be told what faith, right? What faith? It's very obvious. Look at their faces, you know what faith. With their brothers and all of that, very convoluted. Not like my book, but it was great fun to watch this. Next. Yes, anyone? Yes, Muhammad Ali Road. Who said Muhammad Ali Road? Yeah, yes, Muhammad Ali Road. This is what, people, not everyone has to fast because it's Ramadan. You don't have to fast, but you can still eat. So even now, if you can go to some Muhammad Ali Road or some road in Mumbai or many parts of India, you just go and eat. You don't have to be following any faith. This is fun because it's great food at midnight. Next. Yes, so this is Ira's life. Obviously, Omar and Ira don't get together for all the reasons we spoke about, for various reasons. She's moved to London. She's living in Croydon with her family, with her in-laws and her husband, and this then becomes her favorite place. Can anyone recognize this? We've all been there. It's in London. Yes? Little Venice, yes, absolutely, Sanjay. Little Venice, it's near Paddington. So it's a beautiful little lovely place in the middle of Paddington. Yes? Was anyone here?
Yeah.
Yes, of course. Yes, we were here. This is 2015 Wembley Stadium. Yeah, very much featuring in the book, turning point in the book. Yes, that's it from me right now. Thank you. And we've got Mahi and Tanvi reading. And I'll see you again soon after.
Hi, I'm Mahi, and the first passage that I'm going to read today is set in the year 1981. As 7-year-olds, Ida and Omar were picked to play Mary and Joseph in their school nativity play. Ida, in a pale blue gossamer gown, stitched by the neighbourhood Dorabji tailor, was about to drop the blue-eyed blonde doll in her arms as she struggled to not trip over the floor-length garment. Omar held out his palm, and Ida gratefully held on to it. With his free hand, Omar slightly lifted the skirt of her trailing gown, and the little holy couple calmly walked across the stage, the children's choir singing, "Hark the holy angels sing, a new king is born today. Mary's boy child, Jesus Christ, was born on Christmas Day." Ida's parents and her grandmother Saguna, in her crisp white nawari, the traditional 9-yard sari, applauded proudly in the audience. Just a few rows behind, Omar's mother Sakina Bi and her driver Kartar Singh, always by her side, especially when she had to deal with conversation in English, beamed and clapped expeditiously, delighted to see Omar in a protagonist role on stage, whatever it was he was supposed to be doing. Omar's father, Mushtaq Siddiqui, was absent, travelling on business. A few years later, in 1984, petrified that a mob would attack Kartar Singh on account of his turban, following the anti-Sikh sentiment resulting from Indira Gandhi's assassination, Omar held out his hand again. Ida clutched it tight, and the 10-year-olds ran safely home from school. This was also the year that their class teacher decided to do her bit for national integration, by dressing her wards in finery, representing each of the states of India. Endorsing stereotypes to the hilt, the teacher relegated the dark-skinned ones to the southern states, failing to acknowledge that the southern states had their share of fair-skinned population, and the rest of India had both fair and dark people. But these were innocent faux pas that people took in their stride during the 1980s. Pale-skinned Omar and Ida were conveniently given the snow-capped, picturesque northern state of Kashmir to represent, for sadly, their cosmopolitan classroom had no children from violence-ridden Kashmir. Omar's mother had gladly lent her sister Rabia's bright red, sequined, knee-length kurta to Ida for this performance. Debating partners, Ida and Omar represented their school in the Model United Nations Assembly. After hours of library research on what at that time seemed to be a different world, far away, was the Israel-Palestine question. Ida and Omar always brought the trophies home. Then, they were elected head boy and head girl. From being the one who could always make Ida laugh, Omar became the one who could make her cry, explode in anger, and blush. Working towards building careers, they were in no rush to announce their relationship to anyone, especially their families. Getting married was to be planned several years later. Their nonchalant existence assured that the friendship that blossomed into romance would culminate in a lifetime of passionate love. The next passage takes us to the year 1992. In their picture-perfect dream family, teenage Omar and Ira were to have a son named Aman and a daughter named Ishani, both carefully selected names that would be acceptable to both Hindu and Muslim sensibilities. Wandering around South Mumbai during their summer holidays, Ira and Omar had enjoyed yet another film, Amar Akbar Anthony, over turmeric popcorn at Regal Cinema in Colaba. It was a 1977 film re-released on its 15th anniversary. In splits over how ridiculous this one had been, they ended up at the Mondegya Cafe around the corner. Over tall glasses of cold coffee, they laughed at the convoluted coincidences in the plot. The three brothers, separated, then adopted, by three blessed individuals who were the very embodiment of the stereotypes defined by each faith. The loud costumes, the foot-tapping songs. The conversation had progressed to what Omar and Ira would call their children after they would marry one day. If we have two sons, let's call them Amar and Akbar. Amar to keep the Dikshits happy, and Akbar to appease the Siddiquis, Omar had guffawed. Also, Akbar is the stereotypical Qawwali guy in bright, shiny green shirts, and his girlfriend is a doctor. So, if you still end up being a doctor of some sort, I can be the stereotypical Qawwali guy. Omar thumped the table. After much banter, they had agreed on the 2 agnostic names, tucked away safely in a dream compartment that had remained shut forever.
I'll be reading a passage from 2018, a conversation between Ira and Swati. When he raised, she had been the apple of his eye, especially as she looked so much like him. He would insist I doll up Layla in the prettiest of frocks, warm caps, mittens and booties, and he would take her with him to Sunday church. Once I had finished my household chores, cleaning for the week, grocery shopping, I would join Joseph and Layla at his mother's home for Sunday lunch. In Ai's pristine kitchen, the gods resided in a corner, perched on their wooden shelf with Ai's diligence on their daily showers, fresh flowers, haldi gunku, the glistening brass oil lamp, and the tiny bowl of sugar as daily prasad and homemade sweetmeats on special puja days. Following the pristine Naivedya custom of her priestly father's family, I would prepare the entire plate comprising the full vegetarian meal, neatly arranged on a steel plate. She was so particular. Spoonful each of the dry vegetables on the right side of the plate, the chutney, pickles, salad on the left, a quartered slice of lemon in the center, a tiny mold of rice in its perfect rice mold form, a spoonful of waran, plain lentil curry, on top. The sweet in a bowl on the right of the plate, with the full Naivedya plate ready, which she always cooked to perfection, but never tasted herself until she had offered it to the gods. I would pour a little water onto her right palm, draw a little square with the water droplets in front of the gods, place the plate on it. After that, her green glass bangles would jingle at her wrist, moved the plate 3 times, clockwise. She would fold her hands in a namaste to thank the gods for bestowing the privilege of this dainty food on her family. The ritual over, the plate was always preserved for Baba. I was permitted the special Naivedya plate when I was old enough to confirm that I would finish every morsel. As Sri Ram grew up, he would fight for that plate, and she would refuse to give it to him, knowing that he would not eat the things he would not like. Food thrown away on a plate was never permissible, but food thrown away on a Naivedya plate was sacrilege. It would make the gods angry, she said, for being so ungrateful for the fine food we were blessed with. Swati was lost in her memories. This is as is at Godse house, or at least was, till Sri Ram was alive, Ira was tempted to say it aloud. But she did not want to interrupt Swati. After the journey she had traversed to get to Swati, she wanted to listen to all that she had wondered over the years but never known. She parked the thought to bring up later and listened intently to Swati's narration. I only cooked a vegetarian meal after showering. The mention of eggs or meat unimaginable, and wine in the fridge, certainly not, continued Swati. In stark contrast was Mama Maria's kitchen, squeaky clean, but the fridge laden with all conceivable portions of meats, and Sunday lunch meant the wine flowed freely. Her means were limited, but the swirling love in her derelict church meant that in the name of the one she believed had sacrificed his life for sinners, she had to say grace before the meal, feed the less fortunate, and serve with abundance at the table. Maria's Lord appeared in her conversations as a wise man ready with sound advice, his wrinkled palm resting on the top of the tightly woven braids. If someone overheard, they may have mistaken Mr. Lord to be a kindly uncle fond of his niece Maria. Swati smiled at Layla, who was nodding appreciatively at the apt description of her grandmother. Ira explained, "My, that's a contrast." Swati nodded and continued. In that kitchen, I was overpowered by the smell of sizzling bacon and the fish on the chopping board. I was fascinated by Mama Maria's extensive use of the oven, though, a space I had always exclusively used to store extra pots and pans in her lifetime. When I first wanted to bake a cake for Sri Ram's birthday, It had been quite an exercise to remove all the pots and pans from the oven, wipe it clean from the inside, and for the first time, switch on the unused gadget. As Mama Maria, Joseph, and his brother Leo enjoyed their meals, Joseph lovingly feeding Layla tiny morsels of meat as he ate, I sat in a corner politely eating my boiled vegetables and roast potatoes. But this was the only family I had now, and I did not mind. Swati was smiling softly at the memory. Until that fateful day. The next passage takes us to January 31st, 2019. Omar had been right. The reconstruction event did not receive any publicity. Damodar and Omar had been separately tracking different news media. Dhamaka, meaning explosion, the same Hindi news channel which had shown the poster, continued to air updates. Omar later explained that this channel was also owned by the same extreme right-wing socio-religious organisation floated by Sadhvi's brother-in-law. But on January 31st, the event found its way into a mainstream news channel, with politicians, media, and citizens condemning the proceedings. Omar sent her the link to watch. Ira sat at her desk, eyes glued to the unfolding events on her laptop. Two men held up an effigy of Gandhi. Swathed in saffron, the expansive frame of Sadhvi marched onto the screen and fired a single gunshot at the effigy at short range. Fake blood oozed out of the effigy before it dropped to the ground. The saffron figure then turned towards the camera, the robes bellowing behind, the right hand pointing the gun skyward, the left hand in a victory sign. Sadhvi's incandescent smile exposed beetle-stained teeth, and she brayed into the microphone thrust before her. Jai Hind, Jai Shri Ram. This enactment elicited outrage. The speech spouted by Sadhvi on how the true Hindu Godse of pure Brahmin blood needed to be emulated in seeking revenge on the Muslims causing terror would have put both Godse and Gandhi to shame, for the blatant use of their names was something neither of them stood for. Shrieking into the microphone, Sadhvi exhorted the defenders of the Hindu faith to rise in action against the communities who blatantly murdered the holiest animal in India, a cow. These communities, she alluded, were not just emissaries of the neighbouring state created by Gandhi to pollute the Hindu land, who should have gone to Pakistan when a separate state was created for them, but pollutants at the fringes of Hindu society itself. And then, bowing deeply, she sang a eulogy to her Honourable Bhattashri, the invincible Raghav Swami, who had mobilised an army of cow defenders armed with sticks and social media access to keep vigil on the possible sale and purchase of beef in the entire belt they controlled, and called out these offenders. Ira stared at the screen in disbelief. Had the sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic she had grown up in dropped the secular from its constitution?
It is now the 15th of November 2019. Gangadhar stepped into the balcony, accompanied by Sadhvi's trusted lieutenants in saffron shirts and sunglasses, bearing a cardboard box of syrupy orange motichur laddus and a garland of marigold flowers. Chalo Samir bhai, let's leave. And before that, happy birthday. Bablu placed the garland around Samir's neck. Dalip stuffed a motichur laddu in his mouth. Both gave him a bear hug. Munshi, subservient as ever and eternally hopeful that Samir would be instrumental in getting him a job in London, rushed to pick up his laptop bag. Samir hastily stuffed the envelope and its contents into his laptop bag, and the party headed towards the car. It was an hour before Samir was able to meet Sadhvi. The car snaked through traffic, blocked by supporters sporting saffron ribbons, armbands, turbans, and flags. A couple was selling cow-branded paraphernalia through car windows, several dancing to raunchy music, blaring from the loudspeaker equipment carrying truck that trailed the chariot. The chariot was a modified open motor vehicle with wooden cutouts of white horses stuck on. Sadhvi's imposing frame was on a throne, fastened in the centre of the vehicle. flanked by lieutenants who took turns to clamber up onto the truck and garland her. Sadhvi waved to people who had lined up on the streets to watch, and periodically threw the garlands around her neck at bystanders. Dalit and Bablu hoisted Sameer up onto the throne. Sadhvi bared her teeth in a broad grin. Her lieutenant helpfully held up a small plate with kumku. Sadhvi thrust her plump right thumb into the bright red powder and anointed Sameer, her thumb between his eyes and straight up his forehead. 2 lieutenants were holding onto the bust of Nathuram Godse, covered in white muslin, ready to be installed. A gust of wind blew away the muslin. Sadhvi clapped and yelped, "Koi hai? Anybody there?" A spare saffron cloth was produced as cover. In the interim, Sameer had noticed the statue, commissioned to a local sculptor. He turned to Sadhvi. "Didi, I've looked up pictures and documents of Nathuram for my research. He was slightly built, with a thin, solemn face, close cropped hair, always dressed in a simple Western-style shirt. He never wore a turban, a shawl around his neck, or anything like that. This sculpture shows a laughing, chubby man with a turban, shawl, and Rudraksha beads around his neck. This is not a likeness at all." Sameer's genuine query had Sadhvi livid. Her face blanched, her expansive chest heaved in rage. Maintaining her beatific grin for the target audience outside the truck, her jet black eyes bore into Sameer's green ones. "Babua, I granted you the privilege to call me Didi. Since I renounced the world and donned saffron, I have given up all relationships. You can even give up marital relationships, but brother-sister bonds are forever. You must listen to everything your elder sister has to tell you, for Didi knows better. After 15 years in politics, I'm waiting for my day in the sun. Fine, you gave some money to the party fund. It's dakshina, a donation. And for you NRIs, loose change anyway. You made trips to India, you quit your job, and finally came here to serve the country. But compared to our sacrifice, this is nothing. Nathuram must look like what the people who will vote for us want to see. In this region, we like well-fed leaders with a robust countenance. After all, he killed Gandhi. He should look like that. And young man, don't ask questions. It's not good for your political future." Not waiting for Sameer's response, Sadhvi threw a few garlands at the crowd. The chariot had reached the venue.
We're now in 2019. She continued to text Sameer every 2 days. There was never a response. News about him filtered through via Kaya. He did occasionally respond to her messages. Ira's father kept a close eye on the dubious channels. She had 2 new sources of joy who had taken just 45 minutes to warm up to her, not questioning how she suddenly appeared. Generation-wise, she was in Nan's league. Age-wise, just a few years older than Mum. She couldn't be Mummy's sister, for her hair was woolly black, her skin dark. Ira's hair was dark brown and straight, her skin fair, but not as fair as their daddy's family. Ella and Leon's hair was blonde and frizzy. Their skin was olive, their eyes pale brown. Such were Ella's astute observations. But to her, or to Leon, none of this mattered. To them, she was Ira, who stood outside their daycare centre when Mummy and Daddy were working, whose stories had them in such rapt attention that the vegetables vanished without a murmur. I'm now going to hand over to Santosh, who's going to read from the Marathi translation. For those in the audience who do not speak Marathi, bear with us for a few moments. Thanks.
So as Manjiri said, the book is available in Marathi as well, so I will read part of the Marathi book. Yeah? रांगोळी काढायच्या निमित्ताने इराला जरा ताजी हवा खायला मिळत होती. तिनं पांढऱ्या रांगोळीनं कमळ काढलं आणि कमळांच्या पाकळ्यामध्ये गडद पिवळा रंग भरला. त्याची पाने छानशा हिरव्या रंगात रंगवली. हवेमध्ये गारठा जाणवू लागला होता. इरा उत्साहानं घरात गेली आणि तिने तिची रांगोळी बघायला सगळ्यांना बाहेर बोलवलं. आता ती तिच्या सासू सासऱ्यांना आई बाबा अशी हाक मारत होती. आई बाबा श्रीराम या ना माझी रांगोळी बघायला. आपण ही रांगोळी अशीच भाऊबीजेपर्यंत ठेवूया, म्हणजे स्वातीताईंना पण माझी रांगोळी बघता येईल. हे बोलत असतानाच आपल्या हातून काहीतरी भयंकर अपराध घडलाय याची जाणीव इराला झाली. रत्नप्रभाने हाताचा पाण्याचा जग घेतला आणि तरा बाहेर जाऊन तिच्या रांगोळीवर पाणी होते आणि जोर जोरात ओरडू लागल्या, हे इंग्लंड आहे, तू इंग्लंडमध्ये स्वस्तिक काढतेस. आधीच आजूबाजूचे लोक म्हणतात की या एशियन लोकांना असं महागडं घर कसं परवडतं, आता ते तर आपल्याला नक्कीच नाझी समजते. इराला त्यांचं हे बोलणं समजायला जरा वेळ लागला. हिंदूंचे शुभचिन्ह स्वस्तिक ते उलट केलं की हिटलरच्या नाझी पक्षाचं चिन्ह दिसतं. इराण खूप वर्षापूर्वी शाळेच्या पुस्तकात हे नाझींचं उलट स्वस्तिक बघितलं होतं, पण हिंदूंच्या स्वस्तिकाचा आणि या नाझीच्या चिन्हांचा संबंध तिने आजवर कधी जोडला नव्हता. असू दे रत्ना, भारतात स्वस्तिक सगळेच काढतात, तुझ्या पोथ्यांमध्येही स्वस्तिक आहे. हा एवढा इथे सेन्सिटिव्ह विषय असेल याची इराला कल्पना नसेल, प्रभाकरने समजुतीच्या स्वरात सांगितलं. अस्वस्थपणे इरा तिच्या मोरपंखी साडीच्या काठाशी चाळा करत होती. सॉरी, ती बोलत. सगळी रांगोळी पुसून टाकल्यावर रत्नप्रभा रागारागाने घरात आल्या आणि धुमसून म्हणाल्या, आणि ती स्वाती, ती कधी भेटायला येत नाही, भाऊबीजेलाही नाही आणि रक्षाबंधनाला पण नाही, कधीच नाही. तिला आणि तिच्या त्या काळ्या बेंद्रा बाळाला मी इथे कधीच येऊ देणार नाही. स्वातीचं नाव निघताच श्रीरामचा चेहरा जरा कावळला. एकही शब्द न बोलता तो त्याच्या खोलीत निघून गेला आणि त्याने आतून कडी लावून घेतली. थँक्यू.
I'd like to again welcome Manjari on stage as we will be having a question and answer session. I hope the sessions before this have sparked some questions in your mind, so feel free.
And my question to you is, I have been a reader of all your books. So Maya speaks about a lady who suddenly becomes independent. And there is a Krishna and Mobiles which speaks about the teenage people. And then you have 2 books for your corporate where you speaks about the bosses and the emotional behavior. Whom are you addressing in the name of?
Okay, well, excellent question, Narti. Thank you, and thank you for the past references. The commonality among all these books, all these 6 books, is I think who we are as a family, who I am. And I truly believe that every human being, wherever they came from, must have opportunity, must have equal opportunity. So that's the first, I would say, common factor right across. In the Name of is the second work of fiction. It's addressed to anybody above the age of 10, I would say, or even younger, 9 or 10 and above. So in fact, we have Ovi, one of our students here, and her mother was asking, does she have to go to the children's corner? Can she be inside? I said, Ovi can certainly be inside because she's 12. And when we go back to where we came from and all the influences which have led to this book, I'd like to tell you a very tiny story about a lady who I grew up with. She was, my parents are both doctors, and they were my parents' classmates. And her name is Khalida. And Khalida Maushi is how we addressed her. Khalida is a Muslim name, Maushi means aunt in Marathi. And Khalida Maushi is married to somebody who comes from the Marwadi, Rajasthan side of India. And all our lives, we never questioned why she is the way she is. Because she always wears the tikli, the bindi here. She, for all practical purposes, moves around and is, she just blends into everything. Her daughter is married to a Marathi person. Her daughter-in-law is from another part of India. She's also Hindu. But after all this, I know for certain that she has maintained her faith and she is not converted. She's still a Muslim. So these are the influences we grew up with. And this was very normal when we grew up. And I'm really hoping, your question, Aarti, is that we hope the next generation will grow up like this. Let's look at each other as human beings only. We can all have our differences of opinion, differences of many, many things in the world, but let's not judge other people on the basis of where they come from. And the stereotypes which we saw was, pretty fun in some of it. So and this is pretty much what our school taught us as well. to go back even further, we had we went to a typical convent kind of school, and I don't know if Sangeeta is here, so she went to the same school as me, but she said a lot of our school came back. And we were predominantly, I would say 90% Hindu girls in the class, a few Protestant girls, a few Parsi girls, nobody Jewish in our class, but we had a few Jewish teachers. And we had, I would say, 4 or 5 Muslim girls in a class of 50. And it was never an issue, it was never a conversation. It's Eid, it's Muharram, it's whatever. We had what was called optional holidays. And they chose to stay at home or not stay at home, because the whole school didn't need to be closed. And we went to each other's homes, and we, for Eid and Diwali and everything else. And so I'm bringing this up because I'm hoping young people read this. Of course, everyone else, all adults would, connect with it or not, but I'm really hoping young people will read it. Thank you for the question. So Suvarna, there is a character called Saguna Dikshit in this book. Okay, it's designed after a real lady, and her name was Indira Bai Zog. So she's no more, of course. She was my aunt's mother-in-law. Okay, so because in the joint families we grew up in, everything was all one, and she was in Solapur. And Saguna Dikshit is like her, because I was pretty scared of her. Everyone was scared of Indira Bai Zog. And what she would do, I'm just giving you 2-3 incidences, the way she would project herself. So she was very, very staunch Hindu, wearing a 9-yard sari, just like our Saguna Dikshit here, wearing a white, not always white, but sober colors, all of that. But she was so strict. Everyone was so scared of her, so scared of her. So I'll give you an incident that we grew up in. We are from Pune, but going to my aunt's house in Solapur, I remember the people working for them. There was a lady called Zubeda, and Zubeda is a Muslim person. So Zubeda said, "I'm going to take the children for my cousin's wedding." So we were allowed, and my cousin and me, we were allowed. So off we go, and she washed our hair, and she dressed us in nice clothes, and she said, "This is not good enough," and she changed what we'd selected, and she took us. So we go for this wedding, and it's all very different, because till then we had only been for Hindu weddings, which are pretty standard in a way. And then it was all these influences that, the bride is somewhere else, the groom is somewhere else. They were, all of that was very new for that. We come back, and my aunt is waiting at the gate. Because she's so petrified of her mother-in-law. She's waiting at the gate. She said, come in, come in. Did you have a good time? I said, yeah, we are really young. Yes, we had a good time. What are you going to tell her? I said, we had a good time. What did you eat? I said, we ate biryani. We had chicken biryani. She said, how dare you say that? You should tell her you ate laddu and chiura at the wedding. Right? So there's no question of, so she said, and she knew, everyone knew what we must have eaten. But that was the way she was. And she was so good. The same lady would say, Abdul, where is my puja stuff? Bring it here. Right? So the way she was, her life, it was so clear to her what's okay and what's not okay. What's all right, what's not all right. And it's been decades since she passed away. What I'm saying is that she existed. She very much existed. People wept and wept. Her entire staff, Hindu, Muslim, all of that, they wept and wept when she passed away. Because her heart was in the right place. And whatever difference she had it here, but she was okay. She knew what she wanted. So that's the inspirational character I have.
Thank you so much.
I really want to understand what was the process. How did you arrive at all these details, and how did you get all this information?
Thank you for the question, Anika. And usually the book is, as you know, a journey, and in my case it's a family journey, and in this case it's also a friend's journey. So some friends here have had the privilege, or I would say the honor or dishonor, of having heard too much about the book in the past 5 years that it was written, because it's been a long journey, this one. Because there's some cultures I'm very, very familiar with, some cultures I'm not, like Black history, for instance, I didn't know enough about, but I've been, trying to imbibe those influences. So we actually have been to various places in the book. In fact, to answer your question, one of the publishers for European books, he had called one evening, and he called and we spoke for 45 minutes, and it was very fascinating for me how an Italian man is so fascinated by Saguna Dikshit, because he especially mentioned her character. He said, that lady is a force to reckon with, he said. So the way this happened is really, it was a 3.5 month exercise. This is the fastest book I've ever written. Also because I had time, I had just come back from India after quitting my job, and for 3.5-4 months, just wake up in the morning, just write the whole whole time, but also imbibe. So among the research areas was to understand more about where we as Marathi Indians came from, the sub-communities we came from. And one of the things we did was Abhay and I watched 470 episodes of what is called Unsa Maza Soka, one of the life stories of the reformist Ramabai Ranade. So we did that. I think any country we visit, we go and visit a synagogue. So much so that in 4 countries we have been mistaken for being Jewish because we're going to synagogues, because we just like to go there and see. I see churches anywhere in the world, especially Mani School had an excellent church in Mumbai, the cathedral, there. So we go in there. So all of that. And reading, watching documentaries, Auschwitz, of course, the same person who called, he said, have you been to Auschwitz? I said, yes, we have. And he said, shows that you've been there. Paternoster Square, London is where I used to work once upon a time. There is so much, everywhere you've been there. And the last is really, we went to Alibag, and I'm sure a lot of people here have been to Alibag. And one of the synagogues is in Alibag, mentioned in the book. And I think that was the one we visited last after the book had gone for publishing, because we just hadn't visited. And we went there and we found what we found. So it's going everywhere, it's reading everything, because the authenticity is very important. Though it's a story, it's all fiction. None of the dates should be wrong, none of the facts should be wrong. Dates especially, when we read about 15th of November, on that date, it was Diwali, what happened. So all of that is correct, and that needs to be correct, so that it becomes more feasible. Abhay's sister, we are eternally grateful to her, because Abhay's sister speaks English and Marathi equally well. She writes and speaks English and Marathi equally well. So she has actually reviewed each word from the book. But obviously, because I speak Marathi, it's much better, because what I didn't want is I'm not saying something that's been said in the language. That's quite dangerous, especially with this kind of book. So what we did was a very laborious, but I would say very tech-savvy process. What we did is we got people from our team to read each chapter in Marathi. After it was translated, finished, going, it came back as voice notes, and then I sent back the correction as voice notes, and then she made them happen, and it's there. So you can read whichever language you're happy with. Personally, we are really happy with everything. I think even when Abhay and I were listening, I said, oh, this is fun. Actually, we were on the way driving from here to Aylesbury, and it's a chapter 1. Yes, sounds pretty much like what we wanted it to sound like, because it's not a word-by-word translation. We didn't want that. We wanted the emotion to be translated. And it's really up to you, Anaga, whatever you like. But I've written in English, obviously. But yes, up to you.
So whenever a book is written by Manjari, it takes time to think about what is the right name that will convey the message. Just the title should convey the message. It has to be someone, if you look at the book and the name, then you should be able to feel that, oh, I'm going to pick this up. So now this subject is very close to my heart, the things that are happening in the world around. And we always used to say that why this is being done in the name of something. Why do not they say the reality behind it? They will just say, in the name of culture I do this. Do you really understand what the culture really says? In the name of religion I do this. Do you really know what the original religion said? And therefore when she started sort of her thought process, and we do the research most of the times together when she's writing, but it's a lot of learning for me, because I'm not as learned as she is in terms of various other things. I understand maths and science more. But so we thought that this particular in the name of name for this book is more appropriate, considering that whatever, I think there are about 25 chapters in this book, and each chapter conveys that in the name of this, in the name of A, in the name of B, and so on. So that is how Shanayak, in the name of name was given to the book.
Thank you. Each chapter says in the name of the cow and the pig, in the name of the statue in the minaret, in the name of color, in the name of tradition, in the name of patriarchy, in the name of everything. So it is not to, I would say, not to bring down anyone's faith, anyone's religion, anyone's belief really, but it is just to say, please don't misuse my belief. Please don't misuse what is really being said, and which is what's happening. Because there is a character in the book which says, in the name of, it's so convenient that it's everything in the name of done by somebody else seems to be against women to start with. In all religions, that seems to be common. In the name of many things, which is it's also commercially very People do enough in the name of religion, but actually the purpose is commercial. And more. So all we're saying is don't misuse anything which was originally there. Personally, we have finished doing the casting and everything. They decided who's going to play it. We're not sure if they are interested. But yes, let's hope so. Let's hope somebody finds interest because it will go to a wide audience. Yes, Jay.
What really inspired you to write the book on such a subject? Because it's like bringing so many emotions all together, right? Love, relations, and religion, everything all together. So that's the first one. And the second one, you mentioned Saguna, right? When you wrote the character, you had a specific person in mind and you portrayed that. So the main character, Ira, did you also have anybody specific in mind? Because that's like a very self-giving and sacrificing kind of character, I felt. So did you have any specific character in mind when you wrote it?
Yes, it's very, I would say, the options when you start writing is fiction or non-fiction. So 3 of my books have been non-fiction and they are written in a certain manner. But this kind of message is not subtle, it's quite direct, but it needed to be conveyed in a compelling manner. So if I tried to say that the same thing in various ways where it's directive and saying this is what you should do, it works for a business book, a management book, other leadership books which we have worked on, but not this. It had to be a soft, subtle story, which is what it is. Essentially, it's a story, but it's not just a story because it's happening in the middle of, like one of our readers said, punctuated among real events. And the character of Ira, yes, we do know people like that. We know people who are selfless, who are giving. Like Mrunal Kulkarni said in the beginning, that a lot of women can actually identify with this. And the women can be from various cultures that you leave behind a life which is quite different, and in Ira's case very privileged and happy and blissful, and you come to something else. So it is in a way a migrant tale, but migrant in different forms. I don't want to give away too much of the book, but one of the things when somebody asks Ira in the book, why aren't you angry? Why are you so peaceful and why are you being so calm about this? Why aren't you angry with all this racism around you and everything that's happened? And so she says, and actually Leela asking this question, and she says that on the Windrush, your grandmother came, having no choice really. She was doing a job, they were doing jobs which nobody else wanted to do and they needed to be done. Your other grandfather came in 1964 because he was a Godse, right? Because the Godse surname had many problems associated with it. If you were a Godse, life was very difficult. Soon after Gandhi's assassination, you were really not welcome in the country. So because he's a doctor, he's a Godse, he came still booking his own flight, taking his family. He came by will. He was, also as a doctor, he worked in parts of England where other doctors didn't want to go, but he came here by will. That's also a kind of migration. And look at me, I came on a, I would say, when I say I, she said, Ira comes on a flight in 1993. It's completely by will. So this is all migration. So it's really, we've come here with a certain, in a certain manner where circumstances have brought us. And she said, why am I not angry? Because my anger died on that international flight in 1993. So that's where Ira is from. Working, and I set myself a target of 400 words a day, back and forth, and things have happened like that. The first book was a mess, and I think I got Sushil spoke to me right now, right, talking about wanting to write a book. So a lot of times when you write your first book, it's a mess. You start, everyone starts, and you really struggle to finish it. So obviously it happened with me as well. It was way back 18 years ago. But no, today I don't get stuck. So because it's so compelling. And if it's not compelling, it's better not to write it. So it's like all causes, right? If you give all of yourself and you're there and you're writing and you're conveying, if it's not so conveying, it's okay, don't write it, it's fine. Write something else or do something else, convey something else. So in this case, not. But yes, we can speak more about it. I think we're short of time, so I'm closing this answer. Yeah. Very famous. But Namita Gokhale said that each human being has a book, one book. Inside. I really believe that. Each of us has one story. It could be our story or someone else's story, but each of us has something to say. It's only the second book where you need to be a writer, because then you're actually writing and something else. In my case, what happened was I was a journalist for 10 years, and for circumstances beyond my control, I stopped being a journalist, moved to corporate life and all of that. And there you can't really express yourself fully. We all know, in corporate life, we have to partially express ourselves. So it's a method where you just express yourself. You say what you have to say. Thank you.
So my question to you is: are you kind of optimistic about the state of pluralism, secularism going forward? I'll give you a get out of jail card as well with that. Or do you think, as an author, it's really your job to hold up a mirror to society and not to necessarily opine on these matters?
Many people have asked us, do you really want to publish this book? Are you really sure you want to say this? And the honest answer is that this is what I believe. I believe this needs to be said. It's true. When I say it's true of a lot of people who are afraid. People are right now. People are so afraid they don't even want to type a WhatsApp message on a group because we don't know what will happen next. It's so bad. It is so bad because the fear of being misunderstood is very, very high. Whether I'm optimistic, yes, of course. I was born an optimist, so I'm very, very optimistic. And like Ashwini said in the book, does Ira, what happens? And I hope that people will be happy in the long run. I hope people will be happy. Whether this polarization will end in our lifetime, I think we can only be hopeful. For some of us who are about 40 and 50, we can only hope that it will. We can't be sure, but which is the reason I'm insisting that let young people, grow up in the world we grew up in. One of my readers who wrote to me, she lives in Pune, and she wrote back saying, oh wow, you took us back to a time when we really didn't have to think of all these things. It was so peaceful, it was so happy. We're hoping that your generation gets that time back. We make it very obvious what are the differences, India, Pakistan, the killing of Gandhi, all of that. And we said let's just leave it as is, because it's fissures everywhere. Right? It's just differences. Let's find a difference and fight about it. That's where the world is headed, which is where Sohan's question comes from, right? And we came from a generation where we said, oh, some difference, no problem. Let's move forward. Let's celebrate the difference. So that's where it comes from.
We will just unveil the book, so just give us 2 minutes and then we will start moving on.